You have been blowing my mind this whole time, and I love this conversation. Let's, Alexandra, please help me out. What would you like to hear about? Because I'm just going into
you're emotionally involved in the process, and I absolutely love it. And what you said about good and bad, and how we each individually have also a fair share of bad. We don't realize this. We like to ignore it because it's easier to ignore it, but it's proven. Like social experiments, psychological experiments have been made. The Milgram experiment, other types, and they have shown that we have the ability, without even realizing it, of actually hurting another person. And once we acknowledge that this is not the property of some monster or some individual because of their genes or because of their gender or because of whatever that is, we start have this internal monologue, internal conversation with ourselves to make that, to take that out and be aware of how we behave and what we do and so on and so forth.
A more self-focused viewpoint.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question that I want to dig deeper into, which is connected to parts of the previous discussions that we had, and to the work that you do with the Neurodiversity Foundation. And the very last episode that we've shared with the world was with someone who is not diagnosed, but who, as she presents herself, is most probably has ADHD. And we realize there's a strong correlation between polymathy, those who are involved in a lot of different experiences and complex identities and all of that, and neurodiversity, because the brain is wired differently, and therefore it expresses itself, its identity, in a different way. And given the work that you've done so far, you have been an instigator of neurodiversity in school settings and environments, in perhaps a variety of different ways. I'd love to know in what context and how that happened. And I'd love to know, how is it that the learning experiences, when they're created, they can meet the needs of those who do not fit into molds, of the neurodiverse, of the multi-potentialite, of the polymaths, however we want to call them. How can the learning experience cater for those needs and actually allow them to reach this place, as you've so beautifully called it, of self-fulfillment?
Thank you. Before I jump into this very, very interesting question, Alexandra, I'd like to go back to the point about the good and the bad, right? One of my favorite quotes is by Rumi, and he said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And how I see it is that, we're all wounded individuals. It just differs in intensity on how wounded we are. And in that woundedness, in the context of the work that I do for Healing History, that context of woundedness differs from also intergenerational trauma, intergenerational experiences. So that, what we consider to be good and bad is actually a person who's wounded and who might not be aware of how their woundedness is affecting others. So in the work that I'm doing, specifically on the healing part, in healing history, the premise is for us to identify with what are these wounds, that are keeping these patterns for us. And at the same time, what are the voices of the oppressors that we have internalized and that is also manifested in us. So like what Paul said, we have that bad side in us. That is part of the internalization of our oppressor. The person that says, "Oh, you're not worthy." And then you hear that and you put that back in as, "Oh, I'm not worthy, so I need to, dominate other people to show my worthiness." So that's an expression of that internalized oppression. And for me, this is also why I love that quote from Rumi, is when, the wound is the place where the light gets in. So our role within society is to, to make that wounds visible so that more light can come in. and
Yeah.
that we might be able to, yeah, move from this place of woundedness to a place of strength. And it's the same with this question about neurodiversity, right? For a lot of, for if you look at the history and how special education was created, it was created within this idea of these are individuals who society is deemed less, who are not in the normal bell curve, the outliers.
Yeah.
And to be honest, how I started also with exploring neurodiversity, oops, that's our dog. Um, how I started with exploring neurodiversity. I mean, I've been in the field of education for quite a long time and have taken special education classes. It was only when, as a parent, our son was 2 years old at that time, and we were in a park, and there was this big trampolines in that park, and then you see a lot of kids jumping up and down, totally in their zone with the trampoline. And then I remember our son, he was just 2. Instead of jumping up and down, he went to the side of the trampoline and then just looked down and then looked up again and then looked down and then looked up. And I was just observing. Just noticed how he sees things differently. He doesn't see the jumping up and down that he can do. He was looking at the mechanisms of things. And that for me was a big realization of how can we let other kids have this opportunity to be seen in the ways that they see things, in the ways that they perceive things, rather than on how we'd want them to be. And I remember there was one of my favorite authors, Leah Boscalia. He wrote this book, Living, Loving, and Learning. That was the first self-help book that I read when I was, I think, 16, 17. And in that book, there was a poem about a woman who committed suicide and talked about how her relationship with her parents have caused that, of her parents making their lives as extensions of her. And this is what I see that's prevailing in society. We see kids as extensions of ourselves as adults. We don't see them as for the individuals that they are. And in that, it's easier to put them in a bracket of, oh, these are normal, these are not normal. And then we also have on another end, they would say, oh, these are then gifted. So it's like we're putting them in all these labels and brackets that we fail to see the strengths that they carry within them. Like individuals with ADHD, they're the best persons to be innovators because of their novel brain. They get into ideas, they go into, oh, this is interesting. So how can we encourage them to be innovators rather than telling them to be, oh, you need to be just doing this, which is what happens in the classroom, right? Which is what happens at home. I remember in the Philippines, there's just 2 professions that really matter. Either you're a doctor or you're a lawyer. And then the rest are, it's okay, and that's the framing that society puts people in. So how can we break that? How can we break this thinking of, making children as extensions of ourselves and allowing them to be fully who they are, not as adults, because that's also another thinking that is often happening, right? We think of them as, oh, when you grow up to be an adult, rather
Later.
than who you are right now. And this is for me why I appreciate my kids. When there was one time my daughter was like, oh, mama, I got this grade for I forgot which subject it was, and I said, oh, I'm so proud of you. You put in so effort in this. And she told me, yes, I'm so proud of myself. Wow. And I remember she was just 8 at that time. Wow. To be 8 years old and to be self-full to say, I'm proud of myself. And this is why the work with neurodiversity is really important, because we want neurodivergent individuals, neurodivergent kids to have that sense of fullness as well, and pride with themselves, because it's not that they're, that they're abnormal, as how society, or deficient, or that they have a disability as how society puts them in, but it's because they have, we all have different brains, and we have different brain strengths. So how can we amplify those brain strengths? And this is why the work with neurodiversity is very important for me. It's like, if there's anything that I would like to really emphasize, is, can we celebrate, that we have different, that we're all wired differently, and that difference in how we are wired expresses itself in a lot of ways. And what might mean, easy for you might not be easy for another, but might be easy for them in other ways. So it's really embracing that strength.